already, so we can enjoy our writers happily greeting the faces of people who have come in to say hello, because it's just lovely. Um, and let me see here. uh, is that Amelia? This is great. So part of what I am thinking, what I like to do, and in the sort of casual warm up as we're still letting people trickle in, is ask about for our visiting writers, like things that they're nerdy about. And I threw out in our brief pre-chat that Star Trek has been a recurring theme, and Christopher mentioned that he'd be an attentive listener to Star Trek, but wouldn't have much to contribute, which I thought I would share that my wife refers to most Star Trek series through her own name. She calls Deep Space Nine Deep Sleep Nine because its function in her world is just the background noise that she can fall asleep to while I'm watching it. And she finds it very soothing, whereas the voice of Neelix in Voyager is too grating to fall asleep to. Can't possibly sleep through Neelix. So, which is to say we do not share our particular nerd obsessions, though last night, on a whim, I asked her to watch the first episode of Resident Alien with me, which is a terrible name for a show. And I expected her to have a sort of ironic appreciation for it. And she got so excited by this ridiculous sci-fi show that I thought she was making fun of me. I assumed, based on her level of excitement, that she was mocking me, and that she was being cruel. But it turned out no, something about this show genuinely clicked for her. So I'll ask you, Jamie, while we're just chatting for a bit in the preamble, what are you nerdy about that's not poetry specific? Because obviously we're all poetry nerds.
I guess everything, right? I mean, the rest of my life isn't entirely nerdy. The new thing today is in one of my classes, we had mentioned this earlier, Dan, we're reading Stephanie Burt's book, Don't Read Poetry. And there's a metaphor at some point that gets unfurled of that book as kind of a guide to a big city subway system, treating the world of an art form like that as kind of a city map. And as a way to play with that idea in my classes, I found this website where essentially you can design your own transit lines with transfers and things like that. So I've been geeking out over, I guess, city planning is what I'd call it, and just renaming stations lines of poetry. So Dan, I'll send you some of these. I think it works well with O'Hara for sure.
That sounds great. So, and Christopher, do you have a non-Trek thing that you've been nerding out about recently?
Um, well, what's taking a lot of my time, and it's pleasurable. This is the poetry thing, and then I'll move away from it because we'll be spending the evening with poetry. I'm editing an anthology of Iranian poetry, and it's it's quite an experience, and I'm excited to put in a little plug for it. Later in 2021, Green Linden Press will be releasing this anthology. It should have over 50 poets from Iran and Iran's diaspora. So excited about that. It's been a lot of work, but it's coming together.
Is this contemporary Iranian poetry, or is it?
Yeah, it's contemporary. Mostly living poets or poets who lived into the 21st century was our emphasis.
Awesome.
Yeah, and in a very different direction, we have a toddler, a 2-year-old, Simon. He's a delight. So I've been relearning how to do things like play Play-Doh and draw tractors. So lots of time nerding out with that.
That's lovely. That's important.
Yeah.
My son is now 6, and relearning all of those things. I'm having to learn versions of math that I didn't ever learn, and it's really I miss the trains. The trains I could really number bonds are a little bit trickier for me. Well, this is lovely. Well, I think we've gotten through the initial deluge of people rolling in. So I'm going to get us started because we have a lot of stuff to enjoy tonight. And so I'm gonna kick us off right now with a very simple hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the first virtual Wells College Visiting Writers Series event of spring 2021. And as I always do with these, I want to start off by thanking the New York State Council for the Arts, NYSCA, which supports all of our programming and has done so for years. And we very much appreciate their ongoing support, which allows us to have events like this. I am Dan Rosenberg. I'm the director of the Visiting Writers Series, but I'm hosting tonight in one of my other capacities as the editor of the Wells College Press Chapbook contest. And the readers that we're welcoming tonight both won prizes from our 2019 contest, the Bennett Prize and then the Chapbook Prize. And they've been so kind and patient as we've struggled with staffing issues and the pandemic and all of the obstacles that made it hard for us to actually bring their work out into the physical world as quickly as we would have liked to, but we have finally done it and we're very excited, and tonight is about celebrating that fact. To that end, I want to thank some of the other folks who have made that possible. I'm starting with Richard Kegler, who is our most recent Book Arts Center director, who came back to Wells to help carry this chapbook project over the finishing line. Thank you, Rich. Two students, Helen Chatterton and Caroline Kellerman, who joined our production team. Michael and Winifred Bixler, who supported so many Wells Book Arts projects with their Letter Foundry, which is just an unbelievable place. And we are so lucky to have access to their expertise and their incredible facility. And finally, incredibly importantly, Leah Mackin, who is our assistant director of the Book Arts Center and who stepped up far beyond the boundaries of her actual job to bring both this chapbook and this broadside out into the world. And so if you are a fetishist of print and paper the way I am, you will want to experience tactilely the products that have come out of the Wells College Press just now, because it's really extraordinary, from the texture of the paper of the cover of this chapbook to the custom frontispiece that we commissioned for this book, to Christopher's broadside, the holes that Leah hand punched into the broadside for specific reasons that she will tell us about in a second. In fact, you know what? I'm going to put a link to the Wells shop right there, and I'm going to ask Leah, could you show us the broadside for a hot second, just so we can all see what you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I will put right now, can I announce the discount code?
Please.
Yeah, the honors are the discount code of all caps B and B, book and broadside. You will get $10 off your entire order. Go wild. The broadside, freshly produced, as you can see here on my not so great laptop camera, there are some nicer photographs of it on the online store site. But yeah, there each broadside is individually hand punched 16 times using a Japanese screw punch, and then each actual print is backed with marble paper scrap. So Richard in here will appreciate that I discovered a lovely little hoard of marble paper scraps from a previous project, and I thought just the best opportunity to finally use these. So it, through the actual broadside, you can see variation of a marble. I was thinking about it as the marble as hallucination, playing off of 4, the ornamentation of repetition of 4. I need some striking visual concrete images to go off of when it comes to how I work on the visual side of putting together a broadside project. So happy to work on it. It's great.
Thank you, Leah. And I'm just going to share the page that shows the broadside here. So you can see this is up on the shop, and Amelia, thank you for putting the link directly to the broadside in here. You can see up close, I hope, sort of what is happening with the hole punching and the marble paper underneath it. It is really an extraordinary thing, and very much continuing the tradition of Wells College Press, where we take a good idea and then make it harder on ourselves by adding the hole punch and the marbled paper backing there.
It's the book arts tradition across the board anywhere, really.
Okay, I
Like,
don't need to call us
yeah.
special, but it is beautiful. Thank you, Leah, for all of your hard work in doing this. So
Sure.
as Leah mentioned, there is a discount code for you all tonight to have a discount if you buy the chapbook and the broadside, which are both for sale on the shop. So I'll remind you of that at the end. Don't worry about it. Here's how tonight's going to work. First, I'll introduce Christopher Nelson, who'll read his poem, which won the Bennett Prize. Then I'll introduce Jamie D'Agostino, who'll read from his chapbook, which won our chapbook contest. Throughout the readings and my intros, I invite you to ask any questions or make any comments in the chat. Many people are already making comments, which is wonderful to see. Keep it up. If you want to respond to a moment in the poems, or you have a question that you think others might want to hear the answer to, please go ahead and ask it, and then I will jump in and sort of be your voice between poems, saying, oh, so-and-so in the chat asked this question. And that way we can have it be a dynamic, sort of engaged experience and not just a thing that we could have recorded and emailed to you, right? We want it to be something that you can participate in. So that's the goal there. If at the end, we have time for more formal Q&A, we can absolutely do that as well. And that's the game plan. And normally I would ask you if this makes sense, but you're all muted. So I'm just going to go forward and start my introduction and sort of explanation of Christopher Nelson's Bennett Prize winning broadside. So his poem, Hallucination with Four Fathers, won the Bennett Prize, which is named after my predecessor and friend, Bruce Bennett, who's a professor emeritus of English at Wells and the former director of the Book Arts Center. And Bruce is famous around here for his generosity as a reader and his genuine excitement about encountering new poems. One of the downsides of all that openness, though, is that when Bruce serves as an initial reader for our chapbook contest, his notes on the submissions tend to not be helpful enough because they're too kind. They don't make the impossible task of narrowing down from all of the great manuscripts we've gotten one final winner any easier. He makes it harder by just highlighting what's great about all of the poems that he loves. So it seemed right that we would create a prize in his honor that sort of expanded the winner's circle by honoring an outstanding poem from a finalist manuscript for our contests. So of all the incredible poems by our finalists, and there were many, we decided on Christopher Nelson's Hallucination with Four Fathers, in part because of its brilliant conflations and dislocations, the shocking balance in this poem of immediacy and reflectiveness. And you will hear what I mean in a second. The poem appears in Christopher Nelson's forthcoming book, Blood Aria, which is coming out very soon, right, Christopher?
It is early March.
Early March.
I just got my advanced copy. I'm quite excited about it.
Very good, very good. Coming out from the University of Wisconsin Press in early March. He's also published 3 chapbooks. There's Blue House, which was in the Poetry Society of America's chapbook series. Capital City at Midnight, which won the 2014 Bloom Chapbook Prize, and Love Song for a New World, which was published in the Seven Kitchens Press Editors Chapbook series. He's the founder and editor of Green Linden Press, which is going to be doing an anthology of Iranian poetry that I will be purchasing, and the journal Under a Warm Green Linden as well, which was named by Entropy one of the best journals of 2017. We are very excited to have him joining us tonight. Christopher, if you would please give us the poem.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Leah, for all the wonderful work you've done. I'm so excited about this. Thanks also to everyone at the press for sticking with it during what I know was a difficult year and seeing the project through. Hallucination with Four Fathers. Late November, sky the color of brushed steel and is cold. A wood-paneled sedan spins in the mud, and my father swears at eternity for every injustice done to him. It is 35 years ago, and he is 35, and he spins and rocks the idiot machine forward and back, blue smoke circling up from the left rear tire as I stand over his grave, where he is a few handfuls of ash, in a cup, in a box, in a blackness thick as 35 years of night, in which he sleeps off a weekend drunk in a room cologned by his body. Stuck in the muck, car full of kids, their faces stare from fogged windows at the pitiless strategies of winter, his curses audible between the engine's tired revs. My father trots towards them, signals that he will push, leans his weight into the cold metal, and just like that, they are free.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much, Christopher. Having lived with that poem for quite a while in the long production process, every time I come back to it, I'm struck by how fluidly it moves through those dislocations and how like the leaps in time and place are somehow seamless and jarring at the same time. It's really lovely. Thank you for sharing that. And congratulations again on the broadside, on the book, and other exciting new things happening in your life.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very good. And so we're going to pivot now to, thank you, Karen, to welcome James D'Agostino to front and center, whose new chapbook, This Much, won the 2019 Wells College Press Chapbook Contest. And man, what can I say about this book to you poor people who don't get to sit with it and wallow in its language at your leisure? I'm sorry. Buy it now, maybe? Because you'll hear how much fun Jamie has with language, but it takes some sitting with these poems to really appreciate how erudite and humble they are, how obsessed they are with observing the world, but how insistent that the language of observation itself leaves fingerprints all over the world observed. Can you follow me? Here's some notes I made to talk to my students about these poems, and this is legitimately from my teaching notes from earlier today. True facts about how ancient Greeks thought sight worked, but also the Greeks probably didn't see so much punctuation in the landscape. That's one note there. This poem's a bit like one of Rilke's Dingedict, like the panther or the archaic torso of Apollo, but his language is so profuse, prolific, kind of shamelessly slutty in its indiscriminate reproductive play. Is this a poem about grace? Jesus, the intensity of this wordplay, this letter play. Is letter play a thing? Look at him justifying the excesses of his poetics. What a perfect ending. I'm in love. So in addition to This Much, James D'Agostino is also the author of Nude with Anything from New Issues Press, and 2 previous chapbooks which won prizes from Diagram New Michigan and Cutbank Books. He straddles the Missouri-Iowa state line with his partner, the poet and book artist Karen Garcia. Jamie, please take it away.
Dan, thank you so much. That was so kind. The first thing I'm struck by is the reminder, make notes for your teaching. The second thing is, in the same way that I feel so fortunate for the time that you spent with my work, I'm sure I've experienced something that your students have for years, which is just the intensity of your attention. I remember when you sent me the first notes on these poems, my first response was, uh-oh, this guy read my poems closer than I did, right? But you really feel that attention, and it does remind me of what it's like to collaborate with a book artist, that sort of physical presence of their body in the making of the work. Poets talk about that metaphorically with our work all the time, but the book artists are the ones with the blisters and the splinters and the ink in their blood, right? So Leah, thank you so much for all the time you put in on that book, and the little progress report update photos that you sent me were such a hoot, and I really appreciate all the work that that you enriched it. It's really humbling to be around. My wife Karen is a book artist, and it's been such a pleasure to watch her throw herself into that world as a poet also, and to kind of see that. And every time I'm hanging around with book artists when they're doing their work, I always need a nap afterwards. It's such an intense, cool, full body thing, and you can really see it and feel it in your final project. It's a product. It's really beautiful. So I'll begin with a poem, and Dan, I love your idea of questions and comments coming in, and we can just all sort of spend time with poetry together tonight. This one is called You Are. This is the moment when lit windows wander the floor, and we try to write wander, but it comes out all light. Autumn fields talcum each other at dusk in stalk dust come harvest, so whenever, November. The late corn outgrows its church clothes. We don't have etherized evening sky. We've got patience all night long. Let us go then, you know, us. Escape would be a palindrome if S's were P's and the C disappeared. If the C disappears, we've been dead for years. For the dew from the sweet grass, the dog licks her shins. Your eyes aren't bloodshot. Your blood just wants to look for itself. It's the quickest pot to boil, the one you don't know what to do with. Stars scooch an inch. It's that simple. Spell it however you want. Maybe I'll keep a few on early, and we'll let the questions come in. This is for my Iowa friends. And Christopher, congratulations on that beautiful broadside. I can't wait to get ours. And so here's a poem from my fellow Iowa poet, Christopher. It's called American Gothic. And it comes from the same place poems always come from. You see something in the newspaper, one of your friends says something, and before you know it, it's launching this new thing. Once I read the headline, Iowa town will vote to disappear, I knew right then, all these years, I'm mayor. Hadn't heard how the final count turned out, didn't think I would. Knew parking wasn't a problem. Power and light now come from the county. The sheriff's still the shit. Smoke up out of the tall corn untwists its braid of blackbirds. Skunk blood, ink spill, dabbed at with a paw piece, keeps the scavengers in meat. In this heat, buzzards lift black murk up to heaven and bring a little more hunger back down to keep us awake at the wheel. That's the deal. I'm halfway from either of us. 80 miles outside of Iowa City, 80 more to my door in Missouri. You're kind of not anywhere. You're kind of not everywhere is the problem with living apart. A two-home no one. You're living in parts. You're living in parts. Bean field to the left, corn on the right's like walking with one shoe. An acre out that flips, so the limp shifts, tilts its tall slosh of sun across this road where up ahead, someone pulls off into shade with a little flatbed filled 3 melons deep. Hills Brothers can left out for the $1. So we're on our honor here in Fairfield, or whatever comes after it, a little town called Amends. I feel like this chapbook could be sponsored by Rand McNally, especially the prairie states. There's a certain imagery in here that I bet Christopher is really familiar with, a little down Interstate 80. a little bit. But these poems all come out of the place that that I find myself in this life in, and it's such a great gift to share it with you.
Well, while you're taking a drink there, Jamie, I would just what you were just saying reminded me of an essay by Seamus Heaney that I was just teaching about Yeats, where he makes the claim that the conventional relationship between a poet and the landscape is that the landscape shapes the poet, right? You're a poet of this place that you are from. But his claim for Yeats was that Yeats sort of imagines the landscape that then becomes the landscape that he is from, right? Like he's not reacting to actual Sligo, he's reacting to his own sort of fantasy of what romantic Ireland might be. And I think when you're describing yourself as like responsive to the landscape around you, it's very audible to me in many of these poems that like it's the landscape, but maybe not how any other human might look at it, right? Like what is central to your perception of the landscape is the process of your own perception, right? Where it's just like, I'm doing that thing where I'm saying a thing and not asking a question, and I hate that when other people do it, so I apologize to all of
I
you.
love when other people do it.
But I think it's fascinating to think about in your poems in particular how it is very Midwestern, it's very Iowa. I'm seeing a lot of like corn and soybean fields happening there, but it's always, I mean, the very first poem of the book has looking out at the land, but everything that you see looks like punctuation, right?
That's such a writer's way to travel, isn't it? And part of, mentioning, as I did in that poem, living in Iowa City and then also in Crooksville, Missouri, where I teach at Truman State, there's a lot of boredom and monotony moving through that landscape, right? Making that commute, not every day, but enough. And so I've kind of perfected, my parents are attending, I shouldn't mention this, but I've kind of perfected writing, sort of while driving. I'm knocking on wood right now and promising never to do that again. But that's such a, that kind of little window of time in between places, in between homes, in between work and home, has been, I quickly recognized, like, this is my best shot to get some writing done. So I think that was another thing that nudged me deeper into the landscape in a way that if I'd been sitting at my desk all the time, I might not have in the same way. Dan mentioned the first poem, and I guess I'll hop in there. Dan, our day has just been filled with people quoting Mary Ruefle. What a lovely day.
I'll read
Thank
it
you,
out so people
Stephen.
can hear it. Stephen Furlong, thank you for this note. Mary Ruefle says, something unpronounceable followed by a long silence points out my life is becoming a landscape. And I think you're never going wrong by quoting Mary Ruefle in any context, but I think
Class dismissed, Stephen.
Yeah.
That's lovely. So here's another one of those. This is becoming a landscape, I guess. This is the first poem in the chapbook. It's called Kindled Measures Going Out, which is, I think for a while it maybe had an epigram, that epigram from Heraclitus, measures kindled, measures going out. And then at some point, I guess it got promoted to title. That's a lateral move for an epigram, I think. Swallow flock floats its quotation above the tall corn. The hair on my soap says, "Oho, look, if you believed a beam lighthoused out from the eye and its sweep through things was seeing, you'd be Heraclitus. Toadstools in a pasture rise in a pattern of parentheses. End of August, fog, blue gauze on the bean field. Go ahead, step in all you want, doesn't make it a river." Oh, what I wouldn't give to have a river coming through Kirksville, Missouri. That would totally help things out. Should we stay out with our field studies? This is called the Goldfinch Caution Tapes. Second full day of autumn, we've got another shot to get summer in the ground before anyone starts asking around. Without a director of field studies, it's up to us to slink the webs with raindrops, to blue jay nail gun 3 quick calls, to stand under your sky and count the ribs in the umbrella. In the wet campfire ash clasped shut, the moths just cinder, but sprung tripwire flying's pure blue sky. You're rooting for the world, like a dog. You're like a dog. The goldfinch caution tapes light's shallow grave. I just came to watch it knock around in some trees, but the lake explained every rain at once, so here goes. If it feels like your life is in pieces, why aren't your poetries, you little library, you little liars? You know you don't have an elm, you got hackberry at best. Maples off their meds die half their heads, look slept in. It's something everyone in universe sees, just not me. I'm not afraid of ghosts. I'm afraid ghost is best a lateral move. Ever hear a light bulb cool talking to a drained pool? You think these things are bodies forever? You see all the sky in that barn? I love that I used that joke earlier before it appears in a poem. That's hilarious. That was a poem that came from, one of those moments in class, just sort of collaborating with students, sitting and, we had read something, I can't remember what, but it sparked a little window of time to do some writing. And I guess I was grouchy, I think, because I do remember getting a giddy thrill silently in my notebook, sitting with my students, calling them little libraries, little liars. It was I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was in between cups of coffee, I'm thinking. Poets who write about teaching, right? There's no shortage of names on that list, and it can be a little claustrophobic, right? Like poetry living in a classroom, and sort of sometimes feels like breathing in a brown paper bag, right? There isn't enough fresh air, external world, outside the classroom that makes it into the poem. But for me, it's such an irresistible subject because those are the people that I work with, right? And so to me, it feels like taking part in writing about work, this amazing, dizzying privilege of working with students in a classroom. This comes from one of those such encounters. Dan and I were talking earlier about, both teaching in college, but having opportunities to teach young writers in summer programs and things like that. And every summer I teach in a program for gifted middle schoolers, which means those preeminent young scholars are smarter than me. And they're great coworkers. They're just such a blast to work with. And I really feel like laboring alongside them, sharing, sort of what I'm working on and what they're working on in response to the same readings and prompts, has really been a nice breath of fresh air for my writing. I think it's really saved a lot. This comes about writing about a particular student. And Dan mentioned in his notes, working with his students, talking about this chapbook, asking if this was a poem about Grace or is it a poem about someone named Grace? And I guess, it's both. So this is called The Sound of Slowly Torn Up Grass for Grace. 100 sacral pops from tiny spines find her the chiropractor, and we're all just late for an adjustment. Was that one of us screaming? Our life's a problem of our own design, so at least we know it's sound. She goes to the lake really just to see it through the trees and leaves. But at the park, she tears a little harder at her everything bagel to be sure to shed a lot of seeds for the sparrows. In the world of 10,000 strings, she's trying to come up with something. What flower does it come from? That bird song. What scent that throat? Now the cat knows where the bunnies burrow, or used to. She always carries a crumpled up piece of paper, writes the same psalm over and over. When hydrogen atoms fuse into helium in the furnace of the sun, It can take 10 million years to climb to the surface. And then it's 9 more minutes to us down here, where luckily our aloes grow, mostly at the rate we burn. Ah, Shoo Josh, you're so right. Oh, a former coworker of mine in the chat just posted a shout out to this middle school program that we both worked in, and we spent 3 weeks together. I'm trying to remember if Grace was in that summer. Shoo Josh, we worked together. I think it was the summer before. I was fortunate enough to spend that time with you and those kids. But just reading that makes me remember the following summer, seeing a student returning to this summer academy who was there the previous year, and in my class, Lainey, I think someone showed her this poem. I had written this poem and given it to Grace, and Grace showed it to Lainey, and Lainey came up to me and she said, when I read that stuff about the hydrogen atoms, I just thought, oh, Jamie. And it really makes me realize in this context of our conversation now that some of those kids know my writing as much as anybody else. It's really an amazing kind of thing. Hopefully they buy a lot of books. Really, anytime, feel free to chime in with any questions. Or comments. It'd be great to roll with those. Christopher's amazing image of that. There were so many in that wonderful poem about winter. I'm trying to think if I have this is a really autumnal book. Not a lot of snowfall happens in this yet, but here's one that sort of heads in that direction. It's called What I've Made of Myself. Quick thaw uncovers nickel-colored winter. Grass a pale gray wire pile. Let's give it a pass. It's all snips and spools. It's all the tools we'll need come spring to string God's green screen for a quick look at the 5-day, right after this break. My dream life renovates every place I've ever lived and jumps around the job sites all at once. All the walls to come down, rooms to fuse, and schools to screw with. The subcontractor of my subconscious swears what's on this clipboard's one long list is me. Dust to pardon, pits to cordon off with. Is it rope? No, of course, it's one strand of your hair. When I went to bed, I didn't even care. But when I woke, I went to work out back beside a left out cup of snowmelt, steeped 1 part scared to 1 part sweet, which isn't a simple syrup, but still, I'm sure I can figure it out.
Jamie, one of my students actually asked this question, not in the chat here, but she wanted to know about your revision process, and her concern. She was concerned about it. Her concern was that the poems seem so sonically tightly knit together that if you don't like a passage, how can you mess with it without having the whole Jenga tower come tumbling down?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's a good question. As soon as you said her concern, I thought this is going to turn into an intervention, isn't it? Well, as I was reading I guess it was the Goldfinch caution tapes, I was remembering some moments where Dan really gently and empathetically pointed out some lines that maybe could go from the poem, right? Some other revisions. And as they were coming out of my mouth now, I could still feel those old lines in there. And I'm so glad you recommended that. I mean, I think that's part of the revision process, right? Once it gets shared with someone else, it just casts a little bit of a different light on it. You can tell because these poems are associative and kind of, leap around a little cascade of non sequiturs that hopefully start to crystallize and click together Lego style. am I going to claim that the poems revise themselves? No, but sometimes they, like Rain on a Dog or something, they sort of shake away some of that superfluous stuff. Dan's probably thinking, not enough, going back to that first manuscript that I sent you. But I think that's sort of part of it, looking, because they're really localized little bursts of writing, these discrete little bundles of one sentence or a couple of sentences that then move on to something else. They can be modular. So I'm a great saver of things and a real pack rat is what I'm saying. So some of those lines in the revision process will just get put someplace else until some other title comes along or something that needs them, right? That kind of has a tractor beam that draws those older lines into them. So there's, even in the new dishes coming out of the kitchen, sometimes I'm sneaking some leftovers, past the guests. If the hot sauce is hot enough, they don't notice so much, I guess. But.
That's great. You're making me feel self-conscious about being an invasive editor at this point. But we talked about it at the beginning, and the policy of the press is, we love this manuscript, we will publish it as is. But if you're open to it, I would be happy to have a conversation with you about every poem in here. And I've been very glad to have that overture received so warmly and so with such a sense of gratitude and welcome. And I know as a poet, when I send my work out into the world and it gets that kind of attention from someone else, for me, the reason why I offer it to other poets is because it's so helpful to me to have those other eyes on it, and to have someone who has already affirmed the value of what you're doing, then say, did you consider this or that? Right. And I think that's the hope, but I don't know. I'm also anxious about having leaning in too hard or something.
There are so many poets in attendance tonight that I've shared work with, and students that I've, we passed pictures of drafts that we're working on back and forth with each other. And that just ups the square footage of any one poem. That makes revision a little bit more exploratory and less I don't know, close quarters combat. Maybe that's a little extreme. We're talking about revising poems here. Close quarters combat, okay, right?
Love it. And Stephen Furlong is bringing it in with the poetry quoting machine over here. We've got W.S. Merwin. Sometimes going over something is a way of entering into a whole new process of writing, finding new layers in a piece of writing. I think of it that way. Heck yeah, Merwin.
That's lovely. Oh, Stephen, thank you so much.
And Courtney noting that instead of revision in her graduate program, it's called reimagining, sort of leaning hard on that idea of not just looking at it again, but conceiving of it again.
That's so, Courtney, you have landed in the right place, it sounds like. Congrats. That's awesome.
Stephen, I love your sympathetic teaching notes. That's wonderful.
I got another poem here. I guess that's not that much of a surprise, right? I have a friend who's a musician and does a lot of now really amazing analog synth sort of stuff that I don't even understand how it works, but it's such a fascinating thing to me. And Barry Phipps is his name, and I've been listening to his new album of that work a lot. And so this comes from the very little bit that I know of that musical world. And it's just a description of, I'm trying to define it, I don't even know how to define it, different qualities of sound that make up these this music. And so it's called Attack, Decay, Sustain, Release. Two small towns rub their mail all over each other at the speed of reading, the speed of walking, really. Feel it? Spring just now, something. The white lilac throws up Satan's fingers. Whatever died around here is going to start to stink. Even traffic splash past pavement far enough away is a wave. It's spring. We'd like to do a few great things, even if it means breaking. Buds herniate even further. I am biodegradation. I'm trying to write a song called Spring, but mostly I'm just home hiding. I've got a few layers of self to burn off, before I can even begin to see robins beak up worms that you can tell by the way the bird whips its whole head up and back and really leans into it, don't want to go. Just today, my mom sent me the picture of a book she's reading, a collection of different writers writing about birds, and it looks like this amazing, beautiful thing. And now I'm realizing, but Mom, I'm writing about birds. So that's also for Barry Phipps and for my mother too. I love you for shattering, Stephen Furlong says. Someone has to, quoting Dean Young.
Yeah.
Dean Young via Stephen Furlong.
That was a poem that Dean wrote as his commencement address for my MFA graduation class.
Right. That's right. Is that the one that involves sticking your tongue in a canister of peanuts? I think.
There's definitely sticking your tongue in something in that poem.
That's in there, right? Oh, that's right. The commencement address. I always think of that at the end of each school year, actually.
Yeah, I like wiping my mouth on a swan.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Are there birds in this one? There's got to be birds in this one. Frogs. It's the bird of the ground. It's called Pie Bird. And for those students of mine who have done a piece of time in Kirksville, Missouri, this is set at Pancake City, a diner that's sort of famous and emblazoned on all our hearts. Although it takes the name of another further south in Missouri in a town called Fruitland, another diner called the Pie Bird Cafe. Maybe the apple's map of scars only shows how far it fell, but down in town at the diner, the calls keep coming long distance for Donna. Rain so faint you'd swear the air was carbonated. Virginia creeper up the elm, this early in autumn does grape jelly. The way to a man's heart may be through his stomach, but on the other end of that tunnel, honey's just another asshole. Singing attracts predators and parasites, takes up energy and time. So put a box around that, it's a vamp, until we're ready to go on, then double back and call it a chorus. Even though those tiny Brazilian toads you showed me are deaf to their own calls, they're still okay with croaking all night long. Which to me now seems suddenly like the response to, what do you think about people not reading much poetry? Like, we're okay with croaking all night long. Plenty of people do it, right? Everybody's doing okay? Dan, how are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling great. I just keep thinking about how gleeful your poetics are, how there's this sense of like, I found a fun fact, and it makes its way into the poem, right? And but the fun fact is married to just like, I found a fun sound in this word, right? Like it's operating on these different levels, but it is, and I think Stephen bringing Dean Young into this conversation makes sense, because there's a great deal of like frenetic celebration in these poems, and just a magpie sense of like, that's going in my poem, and so is that, and I'm going to grab these things and jam them together, and let's see what sparks they make.
That's a lovely description of it.
And Shiloh,
yeah.
Getting that by saying also tied to vulnerability, which I think is absolutely right.
Yeah, the process itself, right? Learning facts and being gleeful about sounds, that could be machine learning, right? We can get a bot, we can get a droid to approximate glee probably, but I don't know if it could be vulnerable, right? Like that's some higher order humanity there. And Stephen Furlong, thank you for putting this in the chat. We're referring to the poet Dean Young, a friend a beloved friend of people here, a teacher for both Dan and I. For me, it was an introductory creative writing class with Dean as I was an undergrad at Loyola. And for Dan, it was graduate school in the Iowa Writers Workshop, you know, two completely RPMs in that kind of class experience, right? How about it's been a while since my parents have been at a reading, so how about another poem I'll dedicate to my mom. I'm going off book here. This is a new thing. And it's called Evolutionary Aesthetic Safeguard. Tonight the moon's a cut round of rock sausage, hung in a rope in the butcher shop window of the cosmos. Moon's got a lot of mouth to feed, of work to do. Life ate my lunch lettuce. So what? What am I going to do? I'm going to open face the day. I'm going to spend less time in those impromptu press conferences of the mind. First of all, let me just say to my creator, ouch. I mean, mama, the cowlick's how I like it. I thought he said that was a poem about his mother. Dan, how are we doing in the TikTok of the evening?
We are great. Can I request? So I had a larger question. I invite folks to just throw a question in the chat as well, please. But I was thinking about how you've structured this book, and you read the first poem, and I talked with my students about how it sets up a lot of the concerns and a lot of the sort of attitude toward the world and toward language that's going to permeate the book. And I was wondering if you would read the last poem, which is also the title poem for the book, and maybe could you tell us a little bit about the process of sequencing, of taking these discrete poems and making a larger collection out of them?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Thank you. Totally. You know, the writers who are sending their work out know about what the calendar looks like in terms of you know, the deadlines at certain presses for their reading periods, for contests and things like that. And it's just part of our, you know, metabolism, like sending out a payment to Visa or whatever it is. It's like, it's time for to make another run at that press. And I'm teaching this semester a sort of, it's not a sort of, it's a small grad class on poetry chapbooks. And there's just a few of us in there, but we were talking about like, when you go from thinking about one single poem, where writing poems can be really hard, sometimes it gets a little easier to think about writing poems. I guess this gets at Stephanie Burt's idea of don't read poetry, read poems, right? And I think from a creative writer's perspective, it gets easier when you try and write a stack of them, rather than let me try and make this one perfect, right? And now we're back at the intersection of revision and reimagination, right? Sometimes building up, Seamus Heaney, right, your word hoard. You need a stack of these things before you can kind of really approach any of them. And so that, you know, the interesting thing about the manuscript that I sent Dan, because the Wells Chapbook Prize had been on my radar, and it was such a treat, you know, to count on sending a manuscript to Wells every year. The one that I sent before this was, I can't remember what I call, oh, actually that one was called, Dan, I don't know if you remember this, you see so many, it was called This Much, was the name of it. And then this manuscript that I sent to Dan had a different title poem in it, which was Play Attention. And I had chosen that because, as we were talking about in the masterclass this afternoon, the dynamic between play and work and how important that is, you know, in poetry. That's a site of collision that so many poets like to set up shop. And so I really wanted to push that play to the surface. And I thought it was such an amazing thing. Dan made this really lovely case, and it was so convincing immediately, for going back to that other title. And I totally appreciated that. So I can't remember sort of what the original, I mean, it was different poems in the manuscript the year before. But I think with this one, it was just a matter of sort of the drama of watching someone juggle who isn't maybe the world's best juggler. You know, part of the fun is how far they have to kind of go around the room to keep it going. And that's how I think about a manuscript, actually, bad juggling, right? Establishing some concerns early on, maybe being able to think about some ways to counterpoint that or add different, you know, different textures to it as you keep the juggling going. And so, as Dan mentioned, you know, I read the first poem, and so this is what the book culminates in, and it's from it's for a friend of mine and former student Bradley Harrison, and it starts actually with the opening line of this poem is sort of poetry conversations that I have with my friend and brother Dobby Gibson, and it's so great that he's here tonight. Tapping into non-literary forms of discourse that sound poetic. And in this case, it involves the NFL draft and how scouts talk about different players' physical capabilities. And it's such a weird vocabulary that they have to talk about these athletes. And so this sentence, the opening sentence, is stolen from that. This much. Sunrise needs more glass in its diet. So I'm up in the kitchen to window it. If my pencil lead's not soft enough, it'll outlive me. If you're not part pollinator, you're part of the problem. The garden's going to golden, go down on one knee in a lean, and then brown out in a mush of November rain and mulch the sepulcher of earth to raise again come spring rots tots. Something big and rotten's always beeping back up our streets, Tuesdays at least, unless the schedule's knocked off its moorings by a holiday. And what's more holy than a toppled mooring? I am 10 seconds away from getting up to figure out those tiny neon flowers out there, colored lipstick long-term maternity leave choir sub. Mouths fly out a voice. Every time I see a red-tailed hawk, I get a paper cut later that day. Hurts like a 9, but I've always been a crybaby 5. I'm scared this much, but I care this much. If you have a heart in your chest, act 1, come act 2, some damn fool's going to get himself loved. Look, I already told you. Hello. And I guess getting back to the idea of play, I just thought, you know, as I was Rubik's cubing poems around to try and keep this juggling match going, I thought, what kind of knucklehead would end a book with the word hello? I guess now we know, right? So it's that sort of giddy little thrill of quilting poems together and starting to see, you know, new possibilities there. Yeah, Dan, thank you so much for asking about that.
That's lovely. That's great. I love ending with hello. It feels entirely appropriate to the whole book when it offered a resolution for the world that you had built in here that I thought was really, really thrilling. There is a question from Ora Martin over here. It says, do you still use notebooks? When do you know when it's time to start writing poems from them? When the notebook is full or when the muses strike? Jamie disappeared.
Just
Oh, he's back.
Standing over the drawer, the graveyard of all these notebooks. Yes, absolutely. I'm crazy about notebooks. I was telling a class recently that that's it. That's the art form. That's where it's at. Just carry these notebooks around. And I was trying to boil down, you know, the creative process and kind of committing to writing anything for a little while. And how it feels to me now like the job is just to have a full notebook by the end of this semester, right? Like that's it. The poems will take care of themselves, right? Especially, it's an indecorous way to describe it, but especially if your notebook is shaped like your backside in a couple of months, because it means you've been carrying it in your back pocket everywhere, right? And if we could just kind of get used to reaching for that, there's all this amazing stuff that gets said that it's so hard to get that surrounded when you think, okay, Tuesday at 2 o'clock, now's my time to be a poet. What shall I write? I, you know, always have nothing in those moments. But if I can get back to a notebook, I can find a little something. Anytime I, in an impromptu way, look at notebooks, whatever my eyes fall upon, get out of here, look at this. That's hilarious. I was going to say everything I look at, it's like I can never share that, but I just happened to notice this line. I care this much. Unconnected. I mean, that's kind of one of the wind up to the conclusion of the last poem that I just read, but I can't see any I'm scared this much. So I guess that was the revision, right? Sort of adding a little duet line with that, something for the rest of the sentence. This homecoming, I'm home, but pretending I'm gone, i.e. writing a poem, leave me alone. That's the school spirit.
That's fantastic. There are some other notes in here. Dobby Gibson contributed just this Ornette Coleman quote. I didn't think you had to learn to play. I thought you had to play to play. Then jumped in with a question for you, Jamie, a very important question. Is it true that little rover was sent to Mars to gather more materials for your poems?
That's a long way to go for such a short poem, but I got one. It's been in the news. I got one. Ugh. All right, this is for Dobby Gibson. After watching a rover pan the Martian landscape, walking a hound in the woods. It's from Saturday. Deer hoof heart halves print the page of this snowfall, or split spade shapes, either toward you or away. End of poem. That's a tiny probe. There's a lot of dark to send that probe into, but that's hilarious. I can't think of another poet who knows from our time in graduate school together and as brothers-in-law and friends since then. There's nobody who knows the kind of behind the curtain of these poems in the way that Dobby does. That cracks me up. Thank you.
Oh, that is fantastic. And thank you.
Does that mean I can write a book called Space Force? I hope so.
That's a Mars trace fossil poem, says Sarah. Fantastic.
Sarah, what is a trace fossil? Again, this is the joy of learning a new fact, especially from an artist who knows her science, right?
Absolutely. Well, this is lovely. I hate to be the bell toller here, but it is after 8, and I do try to respect the fact that we are humans with multiple lives and whatnot. And you have a cameo appearing over your shoulder, I believe, Jamie.
Oh, is that right?
You got someone.
Is it a dog?
Behind your actual shoulder? Yes.
Oh, lovely.
Fantastic. It's not a Zoom call until a pet appears. It's awesome. Thank you all so much for coming for this wonderful conversation we've been able to have. Thank you, Jamie and Christopher, for sharing your incredible work tonight. I just wanted to remind you all of, hold on, this link, which is in here, which is going to take you to the Wells College Press site. And there's the coupon code that Leah mentioned already. Jamie and Christopher, you've both entrusted your work to Wells College Press, and we are so grateful and honored to be able to share it with the world, and so glad that you could kick off the Visiting Writers series for this semester with us. It's fantastic. Everyone is welcome to join us. Actually, next week, the next Visiting Writers series is Lauren Shapiro will be reading from her new collection of poems, Arena, which was just recently listed as like one of the best poetry books of 2020 in the New York Times. And we have a lot of other amazing readings coming up all semester. Shane McCrae, Ed Pavlich, just really incredible writers. And you can find that wherever you found out about this, or if you just go to wells.edu/visiting writers or any of that jazz, we would love to have you all here. Do we have a mailing list or something? Stephen, I want to hang out more. If you follow us on Facebook, Wells Visiting Writers, you will find all the information for all of our upcoming events, and you'll get my annoying and half-competent marketing schemes coming out at you. So that's great. But for now, thank you all so much for coming and for, I like this guy, for coming and for your thoughtful comments and questions. And thank you again, Christopher and Jamie, for sharing your work with us tonight. It's been such a treat. Have a great night, everyone.